All right, boys and girls, it's a pretty simple video today. I'm going over my top 60 Dynasty wide receivers, hear about the midpoint of the fantasy season, see how our expectations have changed for these guys with an 8-week sample to look back at. So let's get right into that. My name is Paul. This is Pure Potential. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment. Let's go. Okay, here's how we're going to do this today. I'm going to go one full tier at a time. I will read out every name in the tier. You're welcome, audio listeners. And then I will zoom in on some specific guys. I might not have a ton to say about every single player, but I will be as thorough as I can reasonably be. And we're going to jump into this first tier, which is really two tiers that I've combined for aesthetic reasons so that I can fit everything on the screen. But I did leave a little gap to show where I'd have kind of a half tier break between the top 2 wide receivers in Dynasty and then the next 5. So this first tier consists of Ja'Marr Chase and Puka Nacua, followed by Jackson Smith-Njigba, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Malik Nabers. Ja'Marr Chase was looking a little dicey there for a couple weeks with Jake Browning, but Joe Flacco came in and immediately understood the assignment. You just spam it to Ja'Marr over and over and over again until the defense proves they can stop it. And so far, they cannot. So he's looking awesome, replicating not entirely what he did last year, but first in the league in wide receiver targets by an insane margin. He has 96. Next closest player has 80. Not going to reveal who that is until we get to that a little bit later. And then all the way down to 68 targets for the next closest wide receiver. So that is volume that you can't replace it. And then we have Puka Nacua, who over his first 5 games gave us 23, 27, 22, 36, and 24 PPR points. Just absolutely automatic from Puka Nacua. I had him as my Dynasty wide receiver 1 for a minute there. Then he got hurt. Luckily, it wasn't serious. He's expected back this week, and he's a clear candidate for wide receiver 1 overall the rest of the way. And then we have this little mini tier break, and we get to JSN. Jackson Smith-Njigba, the NFL leader in receiving yards. You might think, oh, that's got to be Ja'Marr Chase. He has 96 targets, way ahead of the next closest player. Nope, it's JSN leading the league in yards, despite playing on an offense that ranks 30th in pass attempts per game. I guess that's what happens when you have nearly a 35% target share at a 13-yard ADOT, and you catch basically all of your deep targets. He has clearly leveled up his game here in year 3. And Sam Darnold has been excellent as well. So there's just no reason to doubt that this is for real, doubt that this can, for the most part, continue. He's a very young player, and there's not as many questions now about his situation long term because they do seem to have figured something out here with Sam Darnold. So Dynasty wide receiver 3 for me. There's a big change from year and a half ago when I was talking about JSN as a sell in Dynasty. He's clearly proven me wrong in every conceivable fashion. So there you go, JSN, wide receiver 3. And then you have Lamb, Jefferson, and St. Brown, who were pretty much ranked in this range before the season. They're still ranked in that range now. They are some of the best wide receivers in the NFL, some of the best in fantasy. You can put these guys in whatever order you want to. I like CeeDee Lamb the best right now because he's the alpha wide receiver and one of the best passing offenses in the league. His team is always in shootouts because Jerry Jones traded Micah Parsons for some reason, and now the defense is horrendously bad. Justin Jefferson, still arguably the best wide receiver in the league. He's in that conversation, but he's had to deal with a dysfunctional passing game all season, and there's really no reason to expect that to change until J.J. McCarthy shows some signs of life. So that's why he's just slightly behind CeeDee Lamb for me right now. And then, Amon-Ra St. Brown continues to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's really, really good. Gets a bunch of targets every week, scores a bunch of points, whatever, ho-hum. Nabers, though, closing out this tier with Malik Nabers. He was my overall wide receiver 1 before he tore his ACL in Jackson Dart's first start. Such a brutal injury, man, probably hit me the hardest of any of the injuries we've had this year. I have no doubt that Malik Nabers would be tearing it up if he was healthy at the moment, but unfortunately he's out for the year. That has to affect his dynasty value, obviously, but he's still in this tier for me because he doesn't turn 23 years old until June. So he's going to be 23 all of next year. Hopefully he gets back healthy. The injury occurred early enough in the season that I think he will be fully ready for week 1, barring any kind of setback. And now he appears to have his quarterback of the future. So obviously a player you want on any dynasty team, but especially one that's not trying to win in 2025. And there's no reason to think that Malik Neighbors cannot eventually retake the throne of dynasty wide receiver 1 once he's back on the field. And then we come to tier 2, which I guess is really tier 3. And it starts off with Rashee Rice, and then Drake London, Emeka Egbuka, and Tet McMillan. So pretty small tier. With Rashee Rice, I think there's a legitimate argument to have him in the tier above. I wouldn't fault you for putting him there. He has picked up right where he left off with 23 and 25 PPR points in his first 2 games back from the suspension. Mahomes is back to lighting up the box score, and Rice is clearly his preferred target. They're designing ways to get the ball in his hands every which way, including those little shovel passes, quick screens, even handoffs, wildcat formation. Like, doesn't matter what it is. I guess with Rice, I'm still just weighing some risk with the terms of his probation. If you don't know, he has this 5-year probation. It's connected to the suspension. And like, if he does anything wrong in the next 5 years, he goes to jail, basically. And I don't know how much that should weigh into our dynasty evaluations, but it seems like maybe at least a little bit, because he hasn't been known to have the best decision-making ability. And then the other thing with Rice that puts him in tier 2 is just, while he has proven to be a very good wide receiver, he's not just a gadget player by any means. I do still think he's a step below the last tier on raw talent. He's not Amon-Ra. He's not Jefferson or Lamb or Neighbors. So top of tier 2, you can give him a little value bump. You know, if you're a high value competing team, you're just trying to get a guy that can put up legit top 5 scoring the rest of the way. Totally understand valuing him even higher than this. Then we have Drake London, who remains an absolutely rock solid option. He's a great wide receiver. He's target dominant. He's a red zone threat. The problem with London is he just hasn't shown us that sustained elite ceiling yet. And it's possible if Michael Penix had developed the way that we hoped, if he looked like a true franchise quarterback to this point, maybe we would have seen that from London, but that just hasn't been the case. And so I just think he remains a little bit limited in terms of his ceiling. And now we have some uncertainty with the passer long term. We don't know if Penix is really the answer here. And if he's not, who are they going to turn to next, right? So just has to be discounted a tiny bit. Still in that low end wide receiver 1 conversation for sure. Then we have Emeka Egbuka and Tet McMillan closing this tier out. 2 extremely promising rookies. I think you can put these guys in whatever order. I think you can put them ahead of London if you want to. I've already swapped them a couple of times, honestly, moved them back and forth. I ultimately deferred to Egbuka because he has quarterback stability long-term with Baker Mayfield, while I am far from sold on Bryce Young. In fact, I'm pretty out on Bryce Young as a long-term quarterback for McMillan. So that's just a bit of a tiebreaker between the two. But both of these guys are future building blocks in Dynasty. They have strong 23% target shares so far. And keep in mind that rookie wide receivers tend to ramp up in the back half of their rookie year. So to be at that spot through 8 games is really strong. And then both hovering around that 2 yards per out run mark, which is very promising. Egbuka is slightly ahead, not surprising because he's had the better quarterback by far. I'm pretty shocked, honestly, with how bad the quarterback play has been that McMillan is really even close to 2 yards per out run. But again, that's just a testament to how often he's getting targeted when he's running a route and how well he's done on those targets outside of maybe a couple of drop issues. And then we come to tier 3, which is a mixed bag of players that are over and underperforming so far this season. Starts with Nico Collins, followed by Rome Odunze, Ladd McConkey, Garrett Wilson, Brian Thomas, and Travis Hunter. And I maintain that Nico Collins, who slides in here as my wide receiver 12 overall, has done nothing wrong. He is as incredible of a wide receiver talent as he's always been. The Texans offense just sucks, straight up. They are wasting this elite defense that they have because the offensive line is terrible. Stroud has been mostly unimpressive. And the scheme, the Nick Caley offensive scheme that was coming over from the Rams, I thought was going to be exciting, creative. It's just absolutely lifeless. So this ranking of Nico could be too high, but it's just based on the faith that I have in him as an individual talent. And I guess I'm just hoping that they get some things figured out soon. For whatever it's worth, Stroud has strung together a couple of better games of late. So maybe he's figuring some things out, or the offense is. I think eventually maybe we get some of these young receivers on the field and they can take some pressure off, or they can make some plays to keep drives going. I don't know what needs to change. I can't move a guy that's as good as Nico Collins, who I believe in the right offense has legit wide receiver 1 overall type of upside. I can't move him down much further than this. But then we have Rome, who is clearly the biggest riser in this group since the start of the season. And he's a guy I was obviously too low on. I mentioned him as a sell a couple of times, but he's currently the wide receiver 11 in points per game. He's top 20 in the league in first read target percentage. It's just been a really, really impressive leap from year 1 to year 2. It's not one that we typically see when it comes to, the level of inefficiency that we had. But it was a dysfunctional offense. Clearly, Ben Johnson hasn't been able to cover up all of the flaws from Caleb Williams and from this offense a year ago, but he has found a way to get Rome Odunze going, who looks great. So he deserves to be here in this tier. I think it's possible that Luther Burden or Colson Loveland or some combination of the two could pull away some of those first read looks as they get more involved. But most of their work is probably going to come off of DJ Moore and Olamide Zaccheaus' plate rather than Rome Odunze. So I think he's a pretty safe guy at this point in terms of his age, in terms of what you can expect the rest of the way. And so he's here, just outside the top 12 for me, followed by Ladd McConkey, who had kind of a scary start to the season and is now back on track. There are a lot of weapons in this passing game, so there's some week-to-week variance about who catches touchdowns, maybe who has the better matchups. But Ladd McConkey, to me, is just clearly the most talented and versatile of all of these weapons. Between him and Keenan and Gadsden now and Quentin Johnston, he is second in the NFL in targets over the last 4 weeks with 40. And he's averaging 18.6 points per game during that span. So firmly in the wide receiver 1 territory. I don't know if that pace is going to keep up, but he has absolutely found a bit of a groove after a slow start. And it definitely helps that Justin Herbert is lighting it up. He's throwing the ball a ton, but that's part of the deal, right? That he has an elite quarterback, that he's in a high volume passing game. So we're not going to hold that against him, just like we don't hold it against CeeDee Lamb or George Pickens or whoever else you want to point to. So really like Ladd McConkey. Garrett Wilson's up next. I don't really know how Garrett Wilson managed to score as many points as he did in seemingly every single game before he got hurt. The passing game has been an absolute disaster with Fields, as I expected it to be. And Wilson was still getting there like almost every single week just by having a 40% target share and making some acrobatic touchdown catch in garbage time. He's an amazing player, and I never argued otherwise, but he's definitely surpassed my expectations in terms of production this year with how bad the rest of the offense has looked. I don't know exactly when he's going to be back. He's out this week, could be back next week. Hopefully, though, the Jets can find this guy a much better quarterback in the draft. The fact that they have bottomed out so completely does actually give me a little more hope for the outlook for Garrett Wilson long-term, because they have a chance to land, a new franchise quarterback. Whether that guy is in the 26 class, I don't really know. Whether the Jets will make the right pick, I don't know. But it does give them more outs to fixing this offense, during Garrett Wilson's prime years, where he can deliver us potentially a top 8, maybe even top 5 type of season at some point. And then we finish things out in this tier with Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter. These two wide receivers are trending in opposite directions right now, clearly, but I think it makes the most sense to have them back to back. If you want to take the swing on Hunter as the upstart player, I've got no issue with that. I considered flipping them, but Brian Thomas had an incredible rookie season that we just can't entirely overlook, right? He had over 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns. That does not happen by accident. And it's clear that he's just not himself this year, right? He's like leading the league in drops. He looks weird running over the middle, to say the least. Maybe it's mental health, maybe it's injury, probably a combination of the two. I'm not here to say exactly what the issue is because I'm not Brian Thomas, but he's 23 years old and he's got plenty of time to figure things out. So I'm still willing to buy into the talent we saw his rookie year. I don't think that that's just evaporated. It's just a matter of him, getting things right. And I don't know for sure if that happens in 2025. Whereas Travis Hunter, on the other hand, he just finally got going in week 7 before the bye. I was getting very nervous about my Travis Hunter stance. He was my 102 in rookie drafts. The weeks leading up to that game, it was not pretty, but he came through. He had the big game. And you can say, oh, it was garbage time. They were getting blown out. His route percentage has been rising steadily. He's playing basically full time at this point, and he's been winning more reps each and every week on these real wide receiver routes. It's clear to me he's getting ramped up. He's learning the offense. He's learning how to play legit wide receiver in the NFL. And you pair that with his incredibly unique movement ability with the ball in his hands, I think he's going to be a real problem for defenses. It's very possible that he's just the go-to wide receiver for this team moving forward. And if I was going to pick one wide receiver in this tier that I think is in tier 2, within the next month or so, I would pick Travis Hunter to be that guy. I think it's very possible he comes out of the bye and is just on this rocket ship trajectory as the clear go-to target for this team. Can't just put him there automatically because he still has to do it, but certainly a guy I'd be looking to buy, certainly a guy that I'm interested in acquiring before that potentially happens. Now, before we move on to tier 4, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Really easy thing you can do to show your support for the channel and give me the ability to keep making these videos. So in tier 4, bit of a smaller one, Zay Flowers, Chris Olave, George Pickens, AJ Brown. And let's start here with Zay Flowers and Olave, who just don't get a lot of love from the consensus. I think they're two guys that have been consistently too low in rankings. And I understand why, right? I understand they haven't come through with that elite fantasy production over a long stretch. But Zay Flowers has been insanely efficient, especially factoring in his situation, right? 2.41 yards per route run. That's a really, really high mark, especially when you have to play 2 games with Cooper Rush as your starting quarterback and another one with Tyler Huntley at quarterback. He's got a 34% first read target share, and this schedule for the Ravens really opens up over the back half of the year. Lamar Jackson is cleared. He's ready to go. The Zay Flowers renaissance could start as soon as this week. In fact, tonight, actually, when the Ravens play the Dolphins on Thursday Night Football. So I'm big on Zay Flowers. I think he was a good player to buy earlier this year. I think he's still a good player to buy. He's capable of giving us like low-end wide receiver 1 production. I totally believe that. Chris Olave is second in the league in wide receiver targets. Remember I said I wasn't going to tell you who that was at the beginning? Jamar Chase is at 96. Chris Olave is at 80 targets through 8 games. He's averaging 10 targets per game. It's actually insane. Keenan Allen and JSN are down at 68. They're tied for 3rd. So Chris Olave is soaking up volume. His quarterback is Spencer Rattler, or now Tyler Shuck. That's the problem for him, right? He doesn't have that high-end quarterback play, but the volume's there, and the results have been there over the past month, like over 17 points per game in his last 4. So he's finally delivering on what his prospect profile, what his target earning ability, his efficiency throughout his career pointed to. You just hope he stays healthy, right? But very high on Chris Olave here. And then George Pickens has been red hot. He's currently the wide receiver 5 in points per game. I would not fault you at all for putting him at the top of this group. You can do that if you want. I do think his numbers are going to come back down to earth a little bit with CeeDee Lamb back in the offense, and the schedule for the Cowboys just gets harder and harder down the stretch. So this is where I've got him. I understand that the production alone would have him higher, but that's where I think he belongs. And then AJ Brown closing out this group. I'd still have him higher if we were just doing this on pure talent, but it's been really ugly this year for AJ Brown. He's only had a couple of really useful games. And when you're 28 years old, if you're not providing the elite production, your value is going down. That's just how it is. So unless he can get back to form here after the bye week and go back to being a 16, 17 points per game wide receiver, it's more likely to go further down than back up for AJ Brown. And that's why you have to be careful about rostering older players. Not that I was fading AJ Brown, not that I was avoiding him. I thought he was reasonably priced, but this is the risk that you face, right? When younger players like Ladd McConkey struggle for the beginning of the year, their value does not fluctuate the same way because you still see the potential. You still expect at their age they're going to bounce back. When AJ Brown, when the production starts to go, people are not as confident that it's coming back, and you see that value drop and drop and drop. I think the consensus is probably lower on him at this point than I am. So just something to keep in mind when you are talking about older wide receivers. And by older, I just mean like 28, 29. That's where it starts to happen for wide receivers, where you have to maintain a very high level of production to just stay at the same value, let alone rise in value. With tier 5, we officially moved to the back half of the wide receiver rankings for today. And these are all players that are in my late first value range in my Dynasty rankings with Jalen Waddle, Jordan Addison, Marvin Harrison, Devonta Smith, Xavier Worthy, T. Higgins, Ricky Pearsall, Michael Pittman, and Quentin Johnston. We've got some different player archetypes in this tier, right? You've got some steady wide receiver 2 types, starting with Jalen Waddle, who has been very solid since the Tyreek Hill injury. Over his last 4 games, 27% targets per out run, over 3 yards per out run, which is outrageous. 15.6 points per game puts him in that high-end wide receiver 2 conversation. Might even be top 10 over that stretch. And that includes, one of those 4 games includes the monsoon game against the Browns, where the passing game just couldn't move the ball at all. Waddle had 1 catch for 15 yards. That was the game Tua threw like 3 interceptions and Mike McDaniel yanked him off the field. It's hard to hold that one against him. In all 3 of the other games, he's been over 90 yards. So I think rest of season, you're looking at a high-end wide receiver 2, potentially low-end wide receiver 1 in Jalen Waddle. Then you have Jordan Addison, Devonta Smith, kind of in that same vein. Smith has actually been even more impressive than Waddle over the past month or so. With A.J. Brown struggling, he has really stepped up. He's 6th in receiving yards among all wide receivers right now. So very strong case to be had for Devonta Smith as a guy that you could even move a little bit higher in this tier. I still prefer Addison slightly just because of the age difference, and he's been very solid as well since coming back. Part of that is touchdown luck, but he seems to just have touchdown luck. All of his 3 seasons, he catches a lot of touchdowns. So at a certain point, I guess you just have to give him credit for that. Then you have Marvin Harrison, Xavier Worthy. They're kind of the upside plays in this tier. They haven't quite lived up to expectations. I mean, with Harrison, that's an understatement. He's played well below expectation. Still is a good wide receiver, just maybe a little bit limited. His situation isn't great as far as the quarterback play. I don't have a ton of hope that he's ever going to become a super high upside option, but I think he can develop into a player that belongs here, right? Belongs in the Addison, Waddle, Smith conversation in terms of his role, in terms of his production. And Worthy's maybe even more of a wild card, where we have this stretch of production late last year, starts to look kind of impressive. You know, the per route numbers are ticking up. This passing game is crazy. There's more than enough volume to go around to support 2 players, but how much is the dislocated shoulder still bothering him? I don't know. How much of his production problems are because Rashee Rice sort of overlaps with him a little bit? I don't really know. He's not a guy I had like a ton of talent conviction on initially as a prospect. Even late last year, I was pretty skeptical of him. I just think when you have the draft capital, young player, on a rookie contract with Patrick Mahomes, I just think there's enough ceiling there, right? Like, what if Rashee Rice gets hurt? What if he does get suspended again? What happens when Travis Kelce is gone? Like, there are ways for this to pan out for Worthy where I just can't move him out of this late first conversation. I think he belongs here, even if he struggles a little bit in the box score for the time being. There's a good chance T. Higgins would be at the top of this group if Joe Burrow was healthy, but without Joe Burrow, it's pretty bleak. Joe Flacco is just so locked on to Jamar Chase. It has been better for Higgins since they acquired Flacco. I mean, he was literally like unusable with Jake Browning at quarterback. You can at least play him now, but it's still very boom bust. I think he had 3 targets versus like 16 for Jamar Chase in their last game. So it's just much harder to ask quarterbacks to try to make these tight window throws where Higgins isn't getting a ton of separation, to just trust him to make these contested catches the way that Joe Burrow did. So it's going to be very up and down, boom bust. He's not that young. He turns 27 in January. So he's been a little bit of a faller so far this year. Comes in just ahead of Ricky Pearsall, who started off strong this year with a couple 100-yard games before he suffered this PCL injury. I don't know when he's going to be 100%. He still hasn't practiced as far as I know. If and when he does get back on the field, I am high on this passing game. And I'll talk about it again when I get to Juwan Jennings. I think this passing game is going to be very effective when Brock Purdy is healthy, because they're going to have to throw a ton. The defense is awful, and they have a lot of weapons to work with. But you do have to deal with a healthy George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey catching a lot of passes out of the backfield, Juwan Jennings getting healthier, Brandon Ayuk going to come back probably by the fantasy playoffs. So there's a lot of mouths to feed. I don't know exactly what we're going to get from Pearsall, but he's shown enough for me to keep him in this tier. because I solidly prefer him to everybody that's in the next tier. So he stays here in the late 1 group. And then we have Pittman and QJ, big risers for me since the start of the year. Pittman has already tied his career high in touchdowns with 6. He's been one of the biggest beneficiaries of the Daniel Jones experience, of this offense being so much better than we possibly could have predicted. He's not quite on pace to match his 2023 season where he had 109 catches for over 1,100 yards, but that's honestly just because the Colts have been running the ball so well. Like when Jonathan Taylor breaks off an 80-yard touchdown, you lose out on some opportunities to rack up a couple of catches and some more yards. So he looks every bit of the wide receiver he did in 2023 when he gave us like a 16 points per game season. I think that's kind of where he is right now. And Johnston, he started off hot. He's faded after suffering a hamstring injury. Oronde Gadsden has emerged in that same time frame. It's hard to say where Quentin Johnston goes from here because his path has already been so unconventional. Like we just don't see guys who are as bad as he has been for 2 years come back to life very frequently. But he also gave us a 4 or 5 game sample showing what he was capable of doing. So I don't really know. My expectation for Quentin Johnston, and maybe this is tainted by previous bias against him, but I think he's probably going to sink back down into that early second range, just sort of gradually. He'll pop up with a couple more big games throughout the season, but I think Ladd has found his footing as this team's wide receiver 1. I think Oronde Gadsden maybe takes away some of those yak opportunities, some of those intermediate looks. I don't know. It just seems like there's a bit of a target squeeze going on, and right now he looks like the loser in that fight, but we will see as he gets healthier. That brings us to tier 6. DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams, Matthew Golden, Luther Burden, Cortland Sutton, Josh Downs, Jamison Williams, Stephon Diggs, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin. It starts to become like this big jumbled mess between production and youth and just trying to like weigh out age versus current production versus long-term situation. It's a mess. And I think this is where you can start to take a ton of liberty when it comes to what order you put these guys in. This is the order I've decided on. I do not have a ton of conviction in this exact order. You could flip-flop multiple guys and I'd be like, sure, that makes sense to me. But we can bunch some of these players together. DK and Adams and Sutton and Diggs and Samuel and McLaurin. These are all of your useful veteran producers. Metcalf is the youngest of this group. I haven't been that impressed with him from a usage standpoint, but he just keeps finding his way into the end zone. So between his age, his production, it's enough for him to be at the lead in this group. And then Adams, he's the oldest of this group, but he is the wide receiver 9 in points per game. He is just like a legit difference maker for this season. And so he gets the bump over some guys that are useful, but not as likely to just win you a week by themselves. With Adams, like he's still playing great football. The Rams passing game is just absolutely humming, and all of the production goes to Puka and Adams. And then Stephon Diggs is the last guy I'll touch on specifically in that veteran group. He got off to a slow start. Over the last 4 weeks, he's the wide receiver 22 in points per game, and I actually think he has room to rise from there, like a good bit of room. He's got a 26% target share, 2.8 yards per out run. His quarterback is playing out of his mind right now. The thing weighing him down, he's only scored 1 touchdown. And this sample also includes 2 absolute blowout games against the Browns and the Titans, where the passing game just wasn't pushed at all. So I think there are going to be some bigger production games overall for the pass catchers. And I think Diggs is due for some bigger games overall, maybe some more touchdowns as well. Matthew Golden and Luther Burden are the rookies in this group. The production obviously has not been there for these guys. And there are absolutely situations where you can defer to players ranked behind them if you absolutely need the points. But this is where I'm comfortable to swing on the upside of these rookies. I have deferred to Golden ahead of Burden for much of the season because he's getting on the field and Burden just isn't yet. And when you're on the field, that gives you more opportunities to flash, to break out, to improve your value. He hasn't really done that. And I did like Burden more as a prospect. So if Golden is going to continue to just run wind sprints out there, it's not going to be long before these two guys flip. And I understand you can look at Golden on tape and you can say, but he's getting open. It's not his fault. Whether it's his fault or not, he has not been a guy that earns targets dating all the way back to college. That was the big knock I had on him as a prospect, he's never earned a high percentage of targets like per route. And as important as it is to get on the field and earn routes, you also have to earn targets on those routes. And that's not going to get any easier for him with Christian Watson now back. Jaden Reed's going to come back eventually. You've got Dobbs, you've got Kraft. It's crowded, and I'm becoming less and less convinced that Golden is going to emerge from that group as a meaningful, high upside target earner. Whereas with Burden, I don't know when he's going to get on the field. I don't know when they're going to stop with this Olamide Zaccheaus nonsense, but I am pretty confident when he's on the field, he's going to earn targets, because that's what he's done so far when he's been allowed to get out there and run some routes. So I think I will probably flip Burden over Golden, but for this video at least, Golden remains ahead. And the only other guy I'll touch on in this tier is Jameson Williams. I just don't really know what to do with this guy. I've never been high on him. I think I've mentioned him as a sell once or twice at least, but even I am surprised at how uninvolved he's been in this offense. And it's like I could move him lower. I could rank him lower. I feel like his production would dictate that, but he's also young. He's well paid. He has a clear skill set. He's on an elite offense. Like, it has to get better eventually, doesn't it? It feels like it has to, right? So I considered moving him down, but I also feel like he could just string together a couple of good games here and really shift the narrative. Ultimately, though, he strikes me as a player that is just so inconsistent that I don't really want anything to do with him outside of like deeper leagues where you have to start 11, 12 players, because then you can live with the duds if you get some big games in return. In like a start 8, start 9, even a start 10 league, it's just too frustrating to get the bad games. So many of these dud games just to get, maybe an 18-point game, maybe a 20-point game. He hasn't even had the huge boom weeks. So it's pretty tough to roster Jameson Williams right now. Moving on to tier 7, we're getting towards the home stretch here. And this is a small group: Jalen Knoll, Khalil Shakir, DJ Moore, Jaden Reed, Jawan Jennings. But I do think it's important to recognize that the gap between tiers does shrink considerably as we go down. So we're talking about a marginal preference here. Like for context, this tier 7 versus tier 8 is like the difference for me between like a mid second round pick versus a late second round pick. Like, we're not talking a significant difference in value here, but I do have a slight preference to the wide receivers in this group over the next one. Starting with Jalen Knoll, the Texans have been slow playing it with their rookie wide receivers. I guess for some reason they just have to get Christian Kirk and Xavier Hutchinson and even Braxton Berrios on the field. No idea why that's the case, but Jalen Knoll, when he's been on the field, has really flashed. He's shown me enough that I've moved him a tier ahead of Jaden Higgins, who was actually drafted higher, who was a little bit better than Knoll when they were college teammates. But so far, Higgins has run more routes, and Knoll has just been noticeably better at earning targets on his routes. He's been more efficient, 1.7 versus 1.2 yards per route run. He's at a slightly higher yards per target. The problem with Jaden Higgins is that he isn't really succeeding out wide. So when he gets in the slot, he can produce and he can be efficient, but he's just not as likely as Knoll to get those opportunities because of his size. He's more of a guy that you would want to be able to put outside. It's not that different, I think, from like the Keon Coleman problem, where if Khalil Shakir wasn't in Buffalo and you could just put Keon Coleman in the slot, I think he could be a much better player. I just don't know that he can win outside at X. That might be the problem with Jaden Higgins too, because again, he's run more routes. They want to get him out there, but he's just not converting those routes into opportunities, into fantasy points. So Jalen Knoll, I think maybe just is going to be a bit of a better skill fit with Nico Collins. For what it's worth, JJ Zacharyson, Matt Harmon, Brett Whitefield all really liked this guy a lot coming out. I liked him, as a early third round, maybe late second round rookie pick. I wasn't like way out ahead on him or anything, but after a very slow start to the season, he's starting to show some life, and I think he's a player you can still buy. I think you should actually go out and try to get Jalen Knoll, because I think over the back half of the season, he could really emerge as more of a full-time player for this Texans team. Then we have Shakir, who's like your steady low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 type. He doesn't have that high of a ceiling because he's just not a full-time player, but he's got a pretty high floor. He's still young. He plays with Josh Allen. He's a great guy to have as like your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. DJ Moore and Jaden Reed or whatever, I don't think they're that interesting to talk about, but I know you're already asking me, why is Juwan Jennings here? Why is he in this group? He's been terrible. You can definitely argue that he should be in the next tier. That's totally fair. I do want to give him some benefit of the doubt as he has been playing through a ton of injuries this year. By his reporting, 5 broken ribs and 2 sprained ankles. How much of that is exaggeration? I don't know, but he's been hurt for sure. And not only has his starting quarterback been out, but I think that has an especially detrimental effect on Jennings because he has really good chemistry with Brock Purdy. Like with Brock Purdy especially, the ball always seems to find its way to Juwan Jennings. It's just not like that with Mac Jones. Mac Jones is looking for Kendrick Bourne, and he's looking for McCaffrey out of the backfield, and that's about it. I do think that when Purdy comes back, like I said earlier with Pearsall, this passing game should be very dangerous, and the defense is decimated. They're going to have to throw the ball. I think Jennings is capable of being that like 13 to 14 points per game player in the back half. We'll see if it's too crowded. We'll see how healthy Pearsall is, see if Ayuk gets back, but I do think he's capable of that. And that's why I've kept him in this tier. And finally, we come to the last tier, tier 8. If you've watched this far, I'll ask you one more time, hit that subscribe button down below. We've got Jacoby Myers, Rashid Shaheed, Jaden Higgins, Alec Ayomanor, Chris Godwin, Romeo Doubs, Troy Franklin, Wan'Dale Robinson, Keenan Allen, Keon Coleman, Jalen Coker, Tez Johnson, and Shamir DK. We're not going to talk about every single guy here. There's too many names. These are all in that sort of late second round pick conversation. We'll start with Rashid Shaheed. Despite being 14th in wide receiver targets, he is wide receiver 38 in points per game at 11.7. He's been a decent flex play and not really much else. This is largely a quarterback issue, obviously. Not really high quality targets coming his way. We'll see if he gets traded. There's been a lot of smoke on that. I do think that while most new situations would give him a quarterback upgrade, it would probably also come with a downgrade in available wide receiver targets. So probably like balances out for the most part. I think this is where he belongs. We've also got a bunch of rookies and young players in this group in Jaden Higgins, Ayomanor, Franklin, Coleman, Coker, even the guys at the end there, Tez and DK are kind of more recent additions. I don't know how sold I am on the ceiling for Tez and DK, because they are older prospects, day 3 wide receivers. Like historically speaking, that's a pretty terrible bet for long-term production, for high-end value, but they have both found their way into opportunity on fairly open depth charts, and they've both flashed some speed, some big playability. So I think they at least deserve to leapfrog some of the dustier, more disappointing options in the next tier down. But the last guy I'll focus on here is Troy Franklin, who I should arguably have higher. I've kind of started to talk myself into him more and more in the process of preparing this video. In week 1, way back, ancient history at this point, right? The Broncos did the typical Broncos thing, and they just rotated through a bunch of guys at wide receiver 2 behind Sutton. But then in week 2, they suddenly discovered something with Troy Franklin. And since then, he has run just 11 fewer routes than Cortland Sutton. He actually has 1 more target than Sutton and 2 more touchdowns. He's outscoring Sutton 4 touchdowns to 2 since week 1. Now, Cortland Sutton has had a few more chunk plays, so he is still slightly outscoring Troy Franklin. And don't get me wrong, Cortland Sutton is by far the better real-life wide receiver. But Franklin is a year 2 guy. He's earned himself a full-time role. He was an early declare out of Oregon, and he actually had a pretty strong production profile. He's playing with his former college quarterback. So this is not coming entirely out of nowhere with Troy Franklin. I had kind of written him off because he was a day 3 guy, didn't really do anything as a rookie, despite there being a ton of wide open opportunity for him to get on the field. But at this point, he has a pretty fantasy friendly role. He's getting a lot of design touches, 12 design touches since week 1. I didn't actually double check. I'd suspect that's near the league lead, getting over close to 1.5 designed targets per game. So he's a guy you can absolutely start. Who knows, how much room he has to grow from here, but he's definitely earned his way into that late 2 conversation. Kind of similar to, Romeo Doubs and Wan'Dale Robinson, who he's sitting by. These guys that didn't have a ton of pedigree, maybe were left for dead at different points in their career have kind of worked their way back into these very usable roles. So shout out to Troy Franklin, and that's going to do it, guys. Those are my top 60-ish Dynasty wide receivers and tiers. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you think I got one wrong, go let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoy my Dynasty content and you want to see more in the future, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It really goes a long way. There are also options if you want more Dynasty content from me. You can click the plus sign on the subscribe or the link in the description to check out the membership options. You can get access to my Dynasty rankings, updated weekly, private weekly live streams about all sorts of Dynasty topics, and of course, the private Discord channels where I chat with members about trades, about team building, pretty much all day, every day. I will be back soon with another Dynasty video, and I hope I see you then.